Ukraine advances closer and closer to Bakhmut, and now they have the full clear vision of the city, and throughout the process they have been destroying so many Russian tanks that the Russian army is now critically low on these tanks. And at the same time, the leader of Wagner, Prigozhin, started literally humiliating the Ministry of Defense of Russia and even Putin himself. That is why recently he disrespected him in such way, and at this point he pretty much challenges him. But more about all of this in just a couple of minutes. What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. And let's go straight to the point and talk about some ridiculous Russian propaganda. And so, recently, Russians introduced literally a propagandistic artificial intelligence in the form of a deceased politician, Vladimir Zhirinovsky. To be honest, looks pretty creepy. This piece of technology was introduced on the International Economic Forum in St. Petersburg. The reason it is called international because I guess Belarus was invited. And basically he was asked several questions, including the ones about Ukraine. And even though the Russians, they introduced this as a technologically advanced machine, it took several seconds before this creepy monster started to reply. Even Amazon Alexa replies way faster. In addition to that, the Russian singers Grigory Leps and Nikolai Baskov, they offered 1 million rubles, which is approximately, I would say, $16,000 to every Russian soldier who destroys a piece of NATO equipment, such as, for example, Leopard 2 tanks. And even though they said this was not their original idea, they said that they fully support it. And whenever they say it, they look in the crowd and like, do you approve what I say? Is everything good? Just okay, so yes, I fully support the Russian army, just please do not make me a foreign agent. But pretty much yes, I just at this point cannot take out of my head artificial intelligence Zhirinovsky, so just please let me know in the comments what do you think he will say, and just please come up with the funniest answer. And the only thing I see him clearly saying is to like this video and subscribe to the Russian dude. You can also follow him on Instagram, because you can see how he lives outside of YouTube. But okay. And so now let's talk about the Western support to Ukraine, because today we do have some very good news coming. Then we'll go over the update from the East and Ukrainians achieving full visual control over Bakhmut, while Russians are rapidly losing their tanks. And then finally we'll move over to the South and talk about Prigozhin disrespecting and challenging Putin. And first of all, the country of Netherlands will give 4 passive radars via NG to Ukraine. And speaking about the Netherlands, this country along with Denmark will purchase and send 14 Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine as well. Next we have Switzerland, which will send 25 out of its 96 Leopard tanks to Germany to be repaired and then later transferred to Ukraine as well. But it does not end here, because the Ministry of Defense of the United Kingdom pledges another 165 million British pounds military support package to Ukraine, which will be mainly focused on drones. And then right here is one of the very first test videos of a Turkish Bayraktar Akinci drones, which uses Ukrainian engines. Moving forward, recently there has been another military meeting called Ramstein between Western military leaders, and this one was focusing to strengthen the Ukrainian air defense. And speaking once again about Denmark, this country still trains Ukrainians to use modernized Leopard 1A5 tanks on the territory of Germany. And as for now, according to the European Union representatives, approximately 24,000 Ukrainian soldiers have finalized their NATO military training. Next we have the European Parliament, and recently 425 representatives voted in favor of Ukraine joining NATO after the war is over, with only 38 representatives voting against. And ultimately, the very same European Parliament recently acknowledged that it was Russia behind destruction of Kakhovka Dam, and now they consider this as a war crime. And we will talk a little bit in more details about the consequence of Kakhovka Dam and just the situation of the south overall very soon, but as for now, let's quickly go to the east and talk about Ukrainians achieving full visual control over Bakhmut. And first of all, according to the report by the Institute for the Study of War, Russians conducted a limited offensive next to Kupiansk and to the south of Kreminna, no next to Svatovi, but it does not matter because all of this was relatively unsuccessful. And at the same time, both Russians and Ukrainians were conducting their own offensive next to Bakhmut, with Ukrainians being far more successful. And even according to Anna Malyar, she says that even though it is extremely complicated right now to fight for Ukrainians, they are still slowly but surely advancing. And just as an example, we have this video right here, which shows us a pretty successful raid of Ukrainians, which allowed them to advance several hundred meters. The full video unfortunately will not be allowed on YouTube due to its consequences, so that's why I uploaded the full version on my Patreon, the link is down below. There is still 1 week of free access. Then we even have the statement by Alexei Gromov. He says that Russians at this very moment in Bakhmut, they are not capable of anything. Right now they're barely defending their own positions. And I mean, to be honest, it's no surprise here. Even Yevgeny Prigozhin himself, he said in the past that as soon as Wagner leaves Bakhmut, which they did on the first days of June, he said that the conventional Russian army will not be able to resist Ukrainian offensive. And this is pretty much exactly what we see happening right now. And as a result of all of this, Ukrainians are predominantly successful on Bakhmut flanks. They were even able to establish some positions higher above the city, and as you can see from this video, they now have full visual control over Bakhmut, with absolutely no Russians inside. They are standing in the open field and are not being targeted by Russians. Which pretty much allows us to assume that Ukrainians found a relatively safe position above Bakhmut, which allows them to see inside the city, accumulate their forces, and most likely in the very near future they will launch the liberating offensive of Bakhmut. We even have this video where Ukrainians destroy a pretty modern tank of Russians T-80 using just a drone. And in addition to that, as a result of all these hostilities, Ukrainians were able to liberate a small part to the east of Nevelske. And ultimately, in the last 24 hours alone, Ukrainians were able to destroy 13 concentration of Russian forces, 2 command posts, 3 air defense systems, and 3 electronic warfare systems. Right, and now as promised, let's talk about the situation in the south and Russians getting extremely, critically low on their tanks. But first of all, we have to make a stop in Kryvyi Rog, because recently there has been another attack of Russians against a civilian area. But Ukrainian air defense was pretty good last day. They were able to intercept 1 out of 4 Russian missiles and all 20 drones. As we move down to Kherson region, the consequences of Kakhovka Dam incident are getting a little bit better. That is why the average water level in Kherson region at this very moment is only approximately 2 meters, but still 44 settlements are still flooded. But unfortunately, the situation is a little bit worse in Odessa, because as a result of all the chemicals getting into water, the sea in this city turned to this green color. And just like in the east, Ukrainians are also pushing against the front lines in Zaporozhye region, and since the beginning of their counter-offensive, not a single position has been lost. And as we take a look at this map, which shows us the changes in territorial control, we can see that Ukrainians were able to liberate a little bit more area to the south of Orikhiv and also a little bit to the south of Hulyai Pole. And just overall, according to the same Alexei Gromov, Ukrainians were able to liberate 7 different settlements recently, with the total area being liberated since the beginning of this counteroffensive to be at approximately 103 square kilometers. We even have this video of Ukrainians destroying a Russian missile system Tor M2. But then the Russian propaganda presented us with this video of a destroyed tank, as they say it is the destroyed Leopard 2 tank, but if you do notice the basic differences, you will realize that this is actually a Russian T-80 tank. But then they made it even worse, because they show this emblem, saying that this is an emblem of Ukrainian Nazis, while in reality this is an emblem of just Russian special forces. So, I mean, yeah, looks like that the Russian propaganda wants Leopard 2 tanks to be destroyed so much. They are even claiming their own destroyed, obliterated tanks as these Leopard 2 tanks. But in reality, if you think about it, wait, there is more. In reality, the situation is even worse, because reportedly the locals in Kherson region, and especially in Crimea, those locals with some engineering skills, they're being forcefully recruited by the Russian army to fix their tanks. And no such tanks which you can see on your screen right now, because this one is definitely destroyed beyond recognition. But I mean, the ones which are still potentially can be repaired. But if you think about this, Russians are critically low on tanks and critically low on engineers who can fix them, because most likely just have them so many damaged and most likely destroyed tanks that the ones staff that they have right now in the army, the ones engineers, actual military engineers, they simply cannot do this work on time because they're so overloaded. That is why it is my assumption that's why they have to recruit civilian engineers just to help them with this massive inflow of potentially dozens or maybe even hundreds of tanks which they need to repair at this point every single day and week. But if you remember, in the past Russians were just simply abandoning them. At that point they had a lot of military vehicles. Now they finally started to think that, wait a second, we can actually repair them. Well, Ukrainians did not have this mindset of abandoning their military equipment pretty much never. And as you can see from this video, every single time tank is salvageable, they were always making sure to tow it behind the front lines and repair it as quickly as possible. And pretty much, yes, coming back to the southern offensive, Ukrainians are getting extremely proficient with using the drones, so that is why I have this video of another Ukrainian drone destroying a concentration of Russian forces which were hiding all of them at once in the very same building. Unfortunately, once again, I cannot show the consequences because of YouTube being YouTube. That is why full version is on my Patreon, the link is down below. But the Russian nightmare does not end here, no, not even close, because supposedly, allegedly, the most successful military group they ever had, which was Wagner, they started to remove their forces from the front line, and then the Ministry of Defense, if you remember from my yesterday episode, they urged all the participants of private military companies, including, to sign contracts with the Ministry of Defense of Russia and the conventional Russian forces. In response to that, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of Wagner, he said that no, not a single Wagner soldier will sign such a contract, because this is pretty much taking a walk of shame. And to be honest, my very first assumption was that this was another humiliation and in some way challenge to Ministry of Defense of Russia and Putin himself by Yevgeny Prigozhin and Wagner. But before you even know it, the Ministry of Defense of the United Kingdom released their own report, which they say pretty much exactly the same. By making the statement, Prigozhin pretty much challenges and humiliates Putin. And I mean, in the past, Prigozhin started to make fun of just some local generals, then he went all the way up to Shoigu and Gerasimov, then he went after the entire Ministry of Defense of Russia, and now he's no longer afraid to challenge Putin himself. And so, I mean, you probably know this expression that the fish rots from its head. Pretty much once again exactly what's happening right now within the Russian highest authorities, so it will be pretty interesting to see how it unveils in the near future. But besides that, according to Ukrainian government representative Mikhailo Podolyak, he is certain that the actual big, massive Ukrainian counteroffensive has not started yet. At this very moment, Ukrainians are just probing the front lines and testing the defenses of Russians to see their weak spots and then to exploit going from exactly these places. And as for now, it is estimated that only 3 out of 12 reported brigades of Ukrainians are engaged in hostilities, and the rest 9, which can be up to 40,000+ people, even 50,000+. All of these people are just waiting for the better opportunity to put all of their force and pressure into one weak spot of Russian defenses. And so, at this very moment, I think it is relatively safe to assume that sooner or later, Ukrainian counteroffensive will pick up its speed and will be as fast as Kharkiv and Kherson counteroffensive last year. And if you don't want to miss this, just please consider subscribing to my channel. It only takes one click. The best way to support my work is through my Patreon. You can also become my channel member or simply use the PayPal link. Everything can be found down below. Please guys, be careful in the comments because there are scammers pretending to be me, and thank you so much for your attention and see you tomorrow.